So this is just a very brief summary of some of our Qube 1.7 HTS results, which are going to be published in the next couple of weeks in Assay Drug Discovery Technology. So the full dataset will be available there. And for those of you who aren't aware, our site is closing, so I'll be out the door in 3 weeks' time. So any suggestions for further experiments, unfortunately, will not be done. So we completed this HTS actually just under a year ago now, and this is just the full data package for the HTS. So we'll start with some of the assay development work. For those of you who are familiar with the QPatch but perhaps unfamiliar with the Qube, one of the differences is that whereas on the QPatch you can rely on the instrument to do your whole-cell suction protocols and automatically detect whole-cell break, on the Qube you have to apply a pre-programmed whole-cell suction protocol. So one of the things to do in assay development is to optimize that protocol so that you can gain good electrical access into all of the cells but not break them. You can't be too harsh with the whole-cell suction protocols. So the graphs here essentially show data for whole QChips. So these are binned mean capacitances per QChip in the histograms. On the left you can see, first of all, capacitances prior to the whole-cell suction protocol, and then in the open bars, capacitances after the whole-cell suction protocol. So you can see quite a significant increase. And just looking at the numbers, if you divide these by 10, we're working in 10-hole, multi-hole QChips. You'll be able to get roughly the mean per cell capacitance in each QChip. So we're getting a fairly good increase in the capacitances, while at the same time, in the graph on the right, we're looking at seal resistances. So what we're able to see is that we are actually increasing our seal resistance during the whole-cell suction protocol. So we're getting electrical access into the cells while maintaining the high quality of the seals. And again, if you're looking at these numbers, they are mean seal resistances per QChip, but you multiply that number by 10 to get an approximate seal resistance per cell, because we're looking at a 10-hole consumable. So we were quite happy with the whole-cell suction protocol that we'd optimized. The next stage was to look at biophysics, basically trying to establish that the voltage clamp on the Qube was high quality enough to actually run something like nav 1.7. So we used the Qube, the QPatch, and the Port-a-Patch to look at the biophysics. And we're looking at the IVs here. And basically, we're quite happy with the peak IV being in the same place with all platforms using the same solutions. And essentially, the reversal potentials are fairly similar as well. And I think the small discrepancy with the Qube is simply that we didn't apply the voltage protocol as positive as with the other platforms. Similarly, steady state inactivation. So the V-half values for all of the platforms are very much in the same range, and basically the V-halves behave as we would expect for nav 1.7 or all of the platforms. And that led us to believe that the voltage clamp on the Qube is high quality enough to run nav 1.7 and get decent voltage clamp. The next stage was to start looking at the pharmacology. Here we were comparing to the QPatch, essentially trying to establish whether the Qube would be able to also generate SAR data post-HTS. The whole rationale for us with high-throughput electrophysiology that we would be able to run the HTS as well as all the follow-up SAR data generation on the same platform, rather than having to switch from a HTS technology to follow up on electrophysiology. So it was important for us to know that the IC50s generated on the Qube would be similar or identical to the QPatch. So this is just showing some example IC50 traces from the Qube. We got our plates pre-dispensed in 384 microplates from the Groton Central Compound Management Group. All we had to do was dilute them with external buffer and put them on the Qube and run them. So these are mean plus SEM from n equals 4 for all of these 5 compounds. And when we ran comparisons with QPatch, we got basically what we felt was a pretty nice correlation. So the dotted lines are threefold shift in potency. And these are without error bars, but they're from n equals 2 different determinations, but fairly tight data. What we also did, and the color coding is for basically using either fresh cells in red or frozen ready-to-use assay, ready-to-assay cells from Millipore. So basically, you just freeze your cells down in 10% DMSO and FBS, thaw them on the day of the assay, put them into your serum-free media onto the stir on either the QPatch or the Qube, and you're able to generate data for 2-3 hours with those cells. So if you don't want to invest in cell culture for a long period of time, frozen cells are an option. Or the way we were foreseeing using the platform was that we would basically have all of the NAF subtypes in frozen cells, and we'd be able to pick out from -80 whenever we wanted to do selectivity screening for a particular compound. So you have this flexibility available to you by using frozen cells. The next step before actually kicking off the HTS was to look at the robustness of the single point determination. So the very typical step for HTS screening, you test the same compound set twice and see how reproducible the data are. So this is showing the n equals 1 and n equals 2 compound testing for just over 6,500 compounds. The dotted green lines are plus minus 25% variation in the inhibition, which is derived from the variability of our 0.1% DMSO vehicle control. So anything within that band we would consider to be robust and reproducible between n equals 1 and n equals 2. That's within our vehicle control noise, basically. And happily, in this plot, about 92% of all the compounds are within that plus minus 25% variation band. Which is a fairly good result, leading us to believe that indeed the single point HTS determinations would be robust. So we kicked off our compound screening, as Herra mentioned. We had 2 separate libraries totaling about 200,000 compounds. Our median success rate was about 83% throughout the whole HTS, so we generated data for about 160,000 compounds. And the HTS histogram is shown here, compounds in green, vehicle controls in blue, and then our maximal inhibition control in red. So just coming from a HTS background, seeing a histogram like that makes me feel very happy. It's very tight data. Our 3-time standard deviation is at about 30%, and we used that as our hit cutoff. So we had about 2,160 hits, equaling a hit rate of about 1.35% after the whole HTS was done. And yeah, we're very, very happy with this histogram. It looks very nice and tight. So looking at the typical HTS quality controls, looking at the plate controls, here again in blue we see our 0.1% DMSO control and the 3-time standard deviation for that at about 16%. And in red, our internal standard at 10 micromolar, so that's our full block control. So if you use these data to then derive the typical HTS quality parameters such as Z prime, this is the Z prime for each QChip in our HTS. So our average Z prime was 0.8. And considering the fact that the limit for acceptable Z prime is about 0.4, we were well above that, indicating that the assay was indeed very high quality. Another important factor in automated patch clamp screening is success rates. Everybody knows it's not the cheapest assay to run, so you want to get as much data as you can out of each consumable. Happily, our median success rate was 83% for the whole HTS, and as you can see, we have actually this sort of rising trend towards the end of the HTS where we were able to really get familiar with the process of running the Qube. We reordered every plate that was below 60% success rate to try and ensure that we'd test as many compounds as possible. And the question that I always get when I present data like these in comparison to traditional HTS data like Flipper, what do you do with the untested compounds? Well, that depends on your project. In this particular case, we decided that we were basically run everything through, and then the chemistry could decide whether there were any molecules in the untested part of the libraries that they were interested in terms of structure, and we would then pick those. You could, of course, just retest everything, but it depends on what your project priorities are. Here we were trying to push through as fast as possible. Okay, and then we're talking about a Giga-Seal platform here. So obviously after the HTS we wanted to check, and also during the HTS we wanted to have a look at where we actually were on the seal resistances. So these graphs I'll talk through because they're a little bit convoluted perhaps. On the left-hand side, this is binned median seal resistance per QChip, and then essentially each bar has the number of QChips in that particular bin. So if we're looking at a binned median seal resistance per QChip of greater than 50 mega ohm, which equates to about 500 mega ohm per cell, we've got over 90% of our QChips in that band, suggesting that we had a large number of high-quality seals in the whole HTS. Similarly, this is just representing the same thing, but in a different way. So this is now percentage of wells per QChip with seal resistance greater than 15 mega ohm. In other words, 150 mega ohm per cell, which was our QC filter cutoff. And again, in 90% of the QChips, over 80% of the wells had a seal resistance of greater than 15 mega ohm. So we had a high quality seal resistance throughout the whole HTS campaign. So moving on, what did we do with those hits, 2,000 or so hits? Well, typical for 1.7, we look at the nav 1.5 selectivity. This is also done on the Qube. And I suppose the preamble to this graph is these were supposed to be our hits, okay? But you still have a population down here which are not hits, clearly. When we did the heat retesting in nav 1.7 alone, we got a repeat rate of about 52%. All right, so why is that not 100? Typically in HTS campaigns, you never get a 100% repeat rate. That's nearly impossible. So it's likely that we still had some artifact responses in our initial HTS data, which were picked as hits. The compounds also came from different sources. So these were not the same compound plates. They came from a different place in India, where they were pre-prepared for us. And it's also possible that we had some precipitation issues. But back to the point of the graph. So we took those hits, we tested them against nav 1.5 and nav 1.7 on the same day. And anything above the green line, we would consider a nav 1.7 hit. Anything to the left of the red line, we would consider inactive against nav 1.5. So we had this cluster of compounds here, which appeared nav 1.5 selective. Because one of the libraries that we tested was an ion channel focused library, that selective set of compounds actually contains previously tested known selective nav 1.7 inhibitors. So this dataset actually in a way validates our HTS. We were able to pick out those known nav 1.7 selective inhibitors. But there were also novel structures in there, which was quite interesting for the chemists. And for me meant that automated ephys would be able to pick up compounds different from previous HTS technologies. So moving on from there, the purpose of the HTS was to try and identify nav 1.5 selective, but also inactivated state preferring compounds and get to a starting point for medchem faster than previously. So we were looking at something that would be selective straight off the bat, inactivated state preferring straight off the bat. So what we did here, our voltage protocol for the HTS was using a -120 hold, stepping up to 0 millivolts for about 2.2 seconds, then a recovery pulse at -120 for 100 milliseconds, and then a test pulse at 0. So we measured the current both at the beginning of the inactivation step and also after the inactivation step. And this is looking at the ratio of inhibition at those points in our voltage protocol. So the y-axis is inhibition against inactivated state. X-axis is inhibition against the resting state. And the colored compounds are the ones that were highlighted in the previous graph as nav 1.5 selective. So you can see that we have a cluster of compounds which appear inactivated state preferring and selective. And we also have some compounds which are blocking both inactivated and resting states and appear selective. So we were able to differentiate two different clusters of compounds. So in summary, we completed HTS for about 200,000 compounds, generated data successfully for 160,000. Our Z prime factors for the HTS were well above the usually accepted 0.5 or 0.4. Our median success rate was 83% throughout, which can be considered fairly high for APC experiments. We did IC50 validation against the QPatch, and we were able to pick up selective inactivated state preferring nav 1.7 compounds from our HTS. That were starting points for MedChem straight away. Thank you.